Glenn Villeneuve is a name that many people remember from the television series Life Below Zero, a National Geographic documentary-style show that gave audiences a glimpse into life in the Alaskan wilderness. From the beginning of his time on the show in 2013, Glenn became one of the most admired cast members because of his calm, thoughtful presence and his deep connection to nature. Unlike some of the other participants, he was not only surviving in the wild, he was also exploring it with a sense of wonder and curiosity that audiences found inspiring. Glenn's early introduction to fans showed him living in a small log cabin that he built himself. Far from the modern comforts that most people take for granted, no plumbing, no electricity, and heating that came only from a wood stove meant that every single day was a challenge. Before that cabin was complete, he spent a winter in a tent where the temperatures often dropped to 40 degrees below zero. This kind of lifestyle is not only dangerous, it also requires incredible determination and resilience. Yet Glenn carried himself with calmness, which made him stand out on the show. People admired not just his survival skills but also his thoughtful way of explaining life away from modern society. From the start, it was clear that Glenn was more than just another cast member, he was the heart of the show for many viewers. However, his journey would not last forever. In 2019, he suddenly disappeared from Life Below Zero, and his departure left fans with many questions. Why would someone who seemed so central to the program leave without a proper goodbye? To understand the tragedy of Glenn Villeneuve, it is important to look back at his life before fame, the challenges he faced both on and off the screen, and the reasons why he eventually left the show that made him famous. Glenn Villeneuve was born on March 18, 1969, in Burlington, Vermont. Growing up, he was surrounded by forests and natural landscapes, which became the foundation of his lifelong passion for the outdoors. His family lived in a fairly remote area, away from the noise and distractions of city life, and this environment shaped him in ways that became clear later in his adult life. From a young age, Glenn was fascinated by the wilderness. By the time he was just 9 years old, he was already climbing the tall peaks of Vermont's Mount Mansfield. For many children, such adventures would be unthinkable, but for Glenn, they were a normal part of his life. He was curious, brave, and always searching for new challenges. His upbringing also gave him practical skills. He learned how to hunt, fish, and live off the land. These lessons were not only about fun, but also about survival, as living in a rural environment required self-sufficiency. Glenn's family eventually adopted modern technology like television and the internet, but he remained drawn to the old ways of living. He dropped out of school after the 9th grade because traditional education did not satisfy him. Instead, he believed in learning from real-life experiences. In his teenage years, Glenn went on long trips, sometimes even alone, testing himself against the wilderness. By the time he reached adulthood, it was clear that he was not meant to live an ordinary life. His adventurous spirit pushed him to take unusual paths, and eventually, this led him to Alaska. Looking back, it is easy to see how his childhood experiences prepared him for the life he would later choose. While most people are dependent on modern conveniences, Glenn was developing skills that would make him thrive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Before moving to Alaska, Glenn lived a life that was anything but conventional. In his 20s, he worked as a freelance courier, a job that allowed him to travel widely and explore new areas. Travel was not just a hobby for Glenn, it was part of who he was. Each journey gave him new lessons about people, cultures, and survival. But his real passion remained the wilderness. Glenn also earned a private pilot's license and dreamed of being a bush pilot, flying small planes across rugged landscapes. However, he eventually realized that his true calling was not in flying above the land but in living deep within it. This decision brought him to Alaska, a place known for its unforgiving conditions but also for its unmatched beauty. When Glenn settled there, he faced the kind of challenges that most people would never dare to attempt. He built a cabin, lived through brutal winters, and dealt with the constant threat of wildlife such as wolves and bears. These experiences were not easy, but they gave him stories that later captivated audiences. Glenn's move to Alaska was not only about survival, it was about living life on his own terms, rejecting the ordinary path, and embracing freedom. This philosophy made him stand out even before he appeared on television. He began inviting camera crews to document his lifestyle, confident that others would find meaning in his way of living. That decision eventually opened the door to Life Below Zero, where millions of viewers would come to know his story. In 2013, Glenn Villeneuve joined the cast of Life Below Zero. At that time, reality television was filled with scripted drama and exaggerated conflict, but this show was different. It aimed to give an honest view of life in Alaska's wilderness, showing people who lived far away from modern comforts. Glenn quickly became a fan favorite because he represented the true essence of wilderness living. His calm nature, intelligence, and thoughtful storytelling connected with audiences. Over 6 years, he appeared in 85 episodes, sharing not just his survival skills but also his personal life, including relationships and family moments. He spoke about his marriages, his children, and the challenges of raising a family while living in isolation. Fans admired his honesty and his willingness to open up about the struggles as well as the triumphs of his lifestyle. Viewers were especially captivated by his dramatic encounters with wolves and his ability to survive in near-impossible conditions. For Glenn, Life Below Zero was an opportunity to show the world what it really meant to live off the grid, not just as entertainment but as a philosophy of life. However, as the seasons went on, creative differences began to appear between him and the producers. Glenn had his own vision of what wilderness living meant, and it sometimes clashed with the formula of the show. He was less interested in stage drama and more focused on authenticity. While this dedication to truth made him beloved by fans, it also created tension behind the scenes. By 2019, fans were shocked when Glenn Villeneuve was suddenly no longer part of Life Below Zero. His exit was not explained in the show, and there was no official farewell. Viewers were left confused and disappointed. Eventually, Glenn revealed that the producers no longer had plans for him, and he had not been given clear answers about why. This led to speculation about conflicts between him and the production team. On podcasts and in social media posts, Glenn explained that there were creative disagreements, particularly about how his story was being told. He was also known to be very independent, often disappearing into the wilderness for days, which made filming difficult. His willingness to take risks sometimes worried the crew, and his clashes with both producers and cast members made working together more complicated. While Glenn saw himself as someone dedicated to showing the real Alaskan lifestyle, the producers may have seen him as too unpredictable for television. This tension ultimately led to his departure. For fans, his absence marked the end of an era. Many felt that the show lost some of its heart without Glenn, as he had been one of the most genuine voices among the cast. His quiet exit became one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the series, and many people still wonder why he was not given a proper send-off. Glenn's lifestyle, though inspiring, came with a heavy cost. Living in Alaska's wilderness is not simply a matter of bravery. It requires constant hard work and brings both physical and emotional challenges. Glenn often spoke about the toll it took on his body. Injuries from chopping wood, carrying heavy loads, or slipping on ice could quickly become dangerous, especially when medical help was far away. Frostbite, hunger, and exhaustion were constant threats. Over the years, these difficulties left him with chronic pain and long-lasting injuries. But the wilderness did not only test his body, it also tested his mind. Months of solitude could be mentally draining. Long winters without sunlight blurred the days and nights, creating a sense of isolation that even the strongest people would struggle with. Relationships also suffered. Glenn missed time with his children, and romantic partnerships were difficult to maintain in such a demanding lifestyle. Despite the fame he gained from television, money was not always secure. Reality shows do not pay as much as people imagine, and the costs of living in remote areas were high. From bush flights to equipment repairs, Glenn had to carefully stretch every dollar. These struggles remind us that his life was far from glamorous. What audiences saw on television was only a small part of the reality. Behind the inspiring stories was a man dealing with pain, sacrifice, and loneliness. One of the most difficult parts of Glenn Villeneuve's life was balancing his wilderness lifestyle with family responsibilities. Being a father in such an extreme environment brought challenges that most parents would never imagine. Glenn has 4 children, and while he always loved them deeply, raising them while living in remote Alaska was never simple. His first marriage was to a woman named Sylvia Domican, with whom he had 2 children, Willow and Wolf. Later, he was in a relationship with Tricia Kazan, and together they had a daughter named Amelia. Glenn later welcomed another child with his partner, adding even more responsibility to his already demanding lifestyle. When audiences saw him on Life Below Zero, they sometimes saw his children visiting, which gave viewers a rare look at what it meant to raise kids in such an unusual environment. For the children, spending time with their father in Alaska was both exciting and frightening. They experienced nature in its rawest form, something few children in the world ever get to see. At the same time, Glenn's choice to live in such isolation sometimes meant that he missed out on important milestones in their lives. The long distance, the harsh conditions, and the unpredictable nature of wilderness living placed strain on his relationships. Being away from modern healthcare, schools, and social opportunities was difficult for his partners and children, and it often led to tension. For Glenn, the struggle was painful. On one hand, he wanted to live authentically in the wild. On the other, he did not want to lose the people he loved. This constant conflict between personal freedom and family responsibilities became one of the deepest tragedies in his story. Although many fans admired Glenville, fame itself brought problems that few people expected. When Life Below Zero first began, Glenn was simply a man living in Alaska on his own terms. But once the cameras arrived, everything changed. Suddenly, his life was not only about survival but also about being part of a television product. Every move he made could be filmed, edited, and broadcast to millions of people. For someone who valued privacy and authenticity, this was not always easy. The presence of the camera crew sometimes interfered with the natural rhythm of wilderness living. Glenn was used to moving quietly, blending into the environment, and letting nature guide him. Filming required schedules, directions, and sometimes even repeated scenes to capture the perfect shot. This clashed with Glenn's philosophy, as he believed in showing life exactly as it was: raw, difficult, and often unpredictable. The pressure of television also meant that the producers wanted to highlight drama, danger, and excitement. While Glenn certainly faced plenty of real challenges, he did not want his story to be exaggerated or manipulated for entertainment. This creative tension grew over time, making his role on the show more complicated. On top of that, fame attracted public attention that Glenn never sought. Fans admired him, but fame also brought critics, rumors, and questions about his personal life. The wilderness was a place where Glenn could find peace, but television sometimes brought the opposite. The cost of fame was high, and it played a major role in the painful way his time on Life Below Zero came to an end. One of the most powerful parts of Glenn Villeneuve's story is that his life was never only about survival. For him, living in Alaska was a philosophy, a way of life that carried deep meaning. While other cast members on Life Below Zero sometimes focused on the technical side of survival, how to fish, how to trap, how to hunt, Glenn often spoke about the spiritual and emotional side of wilderness living. He saw nature not just as a place to survive, but as a place to connect with life in its purest form. In interviews and on the show, Glenn often explained how living far away from modern society helped him think more clearly, understand himself better, and appreciate life in a deeper way. For him, simplicity was not a loss but a gain. Heating with wood, carrying water, or sleeping in a cabin without electricity was not a burden. It was a chance to live more closely to the natural world. This mindset inspired many fans, who began to see him as more than just a survivalist. He became a symbol of freedom, someone who rejected the pressures of modern life and chose authenticity instead. However, this philosophy also made him less compatible with television producers who wanted quick, dramatic stories. Glenn's view of wilderness living was slow, thoughtful, and deeply personal, while reality TV demanded fast-paced action. This difference eventually became one of the reasons for his departure. But even after leaving the show, Glenn has continued to share this philosophy, teaching others that wilderness life is not only about danger and hardship but also about beauty, peace, and meaning. Of course, living in Alaska was not all peace and quiet. Glenn Villeneuve faced real dangers that could have ended his life many times. Wolves, bears, and freezing temperatures were not just background details, they were daily threats. One of the most talked about moments from his time on Life Below Zero was when he found himself surrounded by a pack of wolves. In such a situation, panic could easily lead to disaster, but Glenn remained calm and steady. He knew that running would only trigger the wolves' hunting instincts, so he stood his ground and slowly made his way to safety. Encounters like this showed not only his bravery, but also his deep knowledge of animal behavior. Another major danger came from the weather itself. Alaska's winters can drop to temperatures below -50 degrees Fahrenheit. In such cold, even simple mistakes, like spilling water on your skin or not having enough firewood, can be deadly. Glenn had to prepare constantly, cutting wood for months in advance, storing food, and always being alert to the risks. Falling through ice, injuring himself while chopping wood, or simply being caught in a storm could have ended everything. These dangers were not exaggerated for television. They were real parts of his life. Surviving them required not only skill, but also discipline and courage. While fans admired his calmness, the reality was that Glenn lived every day with the possibility of tragedy. The danger was real, and it left scars, both physical and emotional. That shaped his story. Perhaps the most important reason why Glenn Villeneuve's story continues to matter is because it teaches lessons that go far beyond Alaska. In a world where most people are dependent on technology, convenience, and modern comforts, Glenn reminds us of something deeper. His life shows that humans are capable of living simply, that we can survive and even thrive with far less than we think we need. This is not to say that everyone should move to Alaska or build a cabin in the woods. Rather, Glenn's example encourages people to think about balance, about how much of our lives are controlled by things that may not truly matter. Many fans say that watching him made them appreciate